Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Now, if I say the words financial crime to you, you'll probably think of money laundering and the processes that banks now make all of us go through to verify who we are or where money is coming from or going to. It's one of the parts of compliance that impacts all of us, and while we might understand logically why it has to happen, it can feel incredibly cumbersome. But imagine you're running a business in a sector that either isn't regulated or isn't regulated as heavily as banking, and you suddenly find that you're subject to exactly those same financial crime regulations as banks are. That's the challenge facing organizations working in sectors like real estate and art, where the underlying assets can and often are used for laundering money. So if you're an estate agent, an art dealer, or anyone else involved in the processes of buying, selling, or procuring high-value items, there are an increasing number of regulations that you need to comply with, but probably don't have much, if any, experience of. And many of those rules aren't designed with those kinds of organizations in mind. So there's often a big disconnect between what regulators expect and what those businesses are able to or actually do deliver, which is where my guest Solène Clément comes in. She's a lawyer who supports clients in this space in meeting their regulatory obligations in a very pragmatic way. That doesn't mean not complying with the rules or bending them. It means bridging the gap between regulatory objectives and the practicalities of delivering them on the ground. Solène is also the president of the Anti-Money Laundering Observatory, a body that seeks to get regulators to understand the practical challenges of their regulations and those subject to them to improve their knowledge and understanding of them. What you're about to hear is someone with a really fascinating and in a very healthy sense disruptive mindset when it comes to regulation. So please enjoy, as I know you will, my discussion with Solène Clément on pragmatic compliance. Solène, welcome to the Human Risk Podcast.
Hi, Christian. Thank you very much for having me.
I am so excited that you're here because I loved the conversation that we have when we met in person. But obviously, many of my listeners might not know about you. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So my name is Solène. I am a lawyer based in Paris, and I've been practicing anti-money laundering compliance for a decade now in different capacity. I've been working in a bank, and now I've been practicing within my own law firm. So I am both advising real estate agents, art dealers to be able to comply with the AML, to navigate complexity of AML. I have founded the Anti-Money Laundering Observatory, which is a non-governmental association in France. But we want to expand, obviously, to worldwide because it is international matters. And at last, but not least, I have co-founded a startup which is called Unomart. It's a digital solution for art dealers to help them implement on a day-to-day basis the anti-money laundering regulation.
Wow, that's a lot of things. And let's start with the observatory because I love the name. I thought it was very cool. But just tell us about the idea behind that.
Well, it's the absence, complete void, was forced to acknowledge that there were, at least in France, no space for people to talk about anti-money laundering. There were some associations, some forum about compliance, but it was more about personal data, anti-corruption, anti-bribery, and they never mentioned anti-money laundering. So it seems completely insane that we didn't have any space to talk about it. And then I also noticed that sometimes the compliance officer, when just some people were just put into that capacity, they had no knowledge, no prior knowledge, and they just like, hey, here is your goal, you have to match it, and they really felt lonely. So I wanted also to address that loneliness because for sure it's just a way to fail, and there is it's not acceptable. And last, but also to me, there is not enough brainstorming, like proper brainstorming, writing article about the subject. So it's also one area that the observatory, I want the observatory to address. So we write article from operational issue and we escalate it to legal issue if we need to. And also one thing important about the observatory is that it is transsectorial. I don't know if it doesn't make sense in English, but most of the time I saw that for anti-money laundering, it was sector by sector. So bank talking with bank, notaries talking to notaries, and it doesn't make sense because in France, it absolutely is the same regulation for everybody. So maybe it was for me time that we all talk together about the same legal background that we need to apply, need to implement, just to make it maybe better. I don't say that it is not relevant for bank to talk with bank about anti-money laundering. I just say maybe it's also relevant that bank talk to insurance, that they talk to a lawyer, that they talk to accountancy, because in the end, the way I understand the philosophy of AML is like each professional within their own understanding of their sector, of their client, of their activity, add some value in terms of AML. So the bank adds some AML value. Let's say if we take a real estate transaction. So the real estate agent will add its AML value. The notary will add its AML value. The bank will add, and so on and so on. So if those people don't talk together about AML, about how they understand, so how do you think we can achieve efficiency? So that's why also it was important for me that the observatory welcome all the professionals.
And I think that's really interesting because if you think about any other regulation or risk that runs across sectors, people normally talk about it, right? So if we look at, I don't know, traffic safety or something, we would say anybody involved in that process would have a similar level of understanding, and we'd look at this issue. But it's kind of interesting that it's talked about in silos in the way you describe, which of course is exactly what the criminals would want. So if you were trying to set up a structure that makes it easy for people to do bad things, right? And of course, they'll just try it wherever they can do it. So then it's not like they can only do it through one sector. So this is obviously something that needs lots of people's participation, but that just hasn't happened for some reason.
No. And when you think about the way AML has evolved, it was first for the financial institution, right? But now I would say that, of course, they are still seen as the most important actor in AML, but there are there are so many sectors who have to implement AML, so it's not relevant to only add the financial institution prism to think about it. It doesn't make sense. So and also I would say, I don't know if you have that, but I think maybe in France, there is room for improvement to foster a certain amount of trust between the different IML professional. Because if a real estate agent is not in a position where I can ask the bank or trust the bank that it would not result in a suspicious activity report on their counterpart, how we can improve the quality of the analysis.
Right. And that's really interesting because basically, unlike the road safety example, where everybody can work together, you make a really good point, right? Which is if I'm working in a sector, particularly a sector that is already has challenges in terms of regulation, right? So that, you talked about some of the sectors that you work with, art's a good example, really, where these are high value items. There's already a challenge for those people in terms of their relationship with their banks potentially. And so the very thing that you would want to have happen, which is the art dealer or the real estate agent has honest conversations with the bank, causes them potentially more problems. And of course, that plays into the criminal element. So it's a nightmare, really, when we start to look at it. We've almost designed it, as I said before, we've almost designed it to help criminals out. And so you're trying to kind of highlight that fact and encourage those sorts of conversations. And I guess that's why you've talked about observatory as opposed to sort of agency or something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah, I think especially in that, well, when I created the observatory, I hesitated with the term institute. But actually, it didn't feel right. We are an observatory, and I wanted to enlighten the maybe the informal side of it. Like, we are observant. We don't see ourselves as a legislator. Like, we are here just to acknowledge, because I guess for me the first step was not there. And also, one subject that often thought about is, and that the FATF has just started, is the impact of AML on fundamental rights. And of course, I just hear it, I anticipate maybe the criticism, like, okay, you want the art dealers to talk with the bank, but what about fundamental rights? And I say, yes, you're absolutely right. We need to work more on that part. At least it's what I think. I think AML should become a classic civil society subject. Like, every citizen should embrace the subject and should take part to that conversation. Because to me, the other problem that I see, that is too much a complex or technical issue. Like, let's let the FATF, let the national body, let the institute deal with it, and let just the citizen give their idea. Well, I think if we want everybody to be more proactive, it needs to be a classic society subject. So we also need to confront it with the fundamental rights area. So we saw the FATF just started the conversation about de-risking, about NGO being targeted by state using AML regulation to try to prevent NGO that were being vocal against the government. And though they just updated the recommendation 8 because of that, because they are trying to fix what hasn't been thought before, and the unintended consequences was very good way of putting it. So the observatory also advocate for anti-money laundering becoming a wider subject, not only technician.
It's interesting when we think about the subject, because for banks, it's much more obvious what the risk is. It's well understood. And of course, banks have got other rules they need to comply with that require them to already have compliance departments and functions that can think about this. And of course, the data the banks capture lends itself much more to looking at this subject. When we think about some of the other industries that you've talked about, in many respects, I guess this is a slightly unusual thing, because they probably don't have many other regulations like this. It's imposed on them. It's not necessarily obvious. And so what you're asking those sectors to do that don't have heavy compliance functions, that aren't in many respects aren't regulated themselves, or if they are regulated, it's not tightly regulated in the way financial services is. You're asking them to deal with something that's super technical. And so it's not just like, here's a rule you need to think about. Here's something that comes from almost from a very different planet. And it's got lots of technical language, and there's lots of things to look out for. And then there's these massive fines and things that come with it. So again, it's designed really, I would say, in some respects. The traditional AML thinking is designed for banks. It's not really designed for people operating in spaces where they don't have the same regulatory environment.
Absolutely. I would say it's one of the biggest challenge for small businesses, small enterprises. As a lawyer, so I deal a lot with real estate agents. And sometimes I just spend 1 hour explaining the risk mapping, the internal procedure, and they said, yes, 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 no problem. We'll do that. And then, can you explain to me what I just explained to you? Well, then it's complicated. And what you're absolutely right in saying that it's designed for banks. It's hard for these other area. And to be honest as well, it's real estate agents. They don't need to have done law studies. They are just sometimes really technician in the really material way, or they are just commercial, and they are a little bit lost, to be honest. They want checklist. Like, please tell me what document I need to take and what do I need to do. And it's like, yes, I can do that for a real extent. But the other extent is that the regulation wants you to ask yourself what's your document that the best document you could ask for your client. And this part is a bit complicated. And also because like they are, if they are on good faith, they want to apply, but to think about what could be the most effective information or document, super complicated. And because AML is not taught at early stage in terms of school, university, or even technical formation for real estate agent, you have people working, and then arriving at the stage that, okay, they are meeting AML regulation and they need to start again the way of doing business, the way they think about it. So it's a lot. It's a lot.
And that's super interesting because lots of regulations exist because people would naturally do this. And so we know that in the context of banking, lots of the rules are there to force behaviors that wouldn't otherwise happen. If we look at the example that you're talking about, this isn't something that, and I think your point about education is interesting, because this isn't something that people naturally think about. The contact the average person will have with anti-money laundering is probably when you try and open a bank account. But even then, it's hidden from you, right? You kind of know that you might have heard the term, but there's invisible things that go on. So this is not something that is obvious to people. And so suddenly you're forced with a set of regulations that feel really odd, that are super technical, that go against the flow of what you would normally do. And so it's not surprising on a human level that this is difficult, because this feels like the job is difficult enough. We're trying to make money here. And then suddenly there's these weird set of rules that you point out. You can't put everything in a checklist. Sure, there's some basic things you can do, but you have to think and you have to understand it in order to spot things that might not be on the checklist. And so it's almost like this is designed to be really difficult. And therefore, theoretically, they have to comply with it. But we can understand practically why they might struggle with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, we can, like the fact that what you mentioned, that somehow AML is hidden by most of the professional, we can wonder, why is AML hidden? Why there is no company using it as a commercial argument? Like here, whether it's not debate about. I don't want to arrive at a simple situation where obviously, but somehow I'm sure it could be a commercial argument. I mean, in Paris, we had suffered terrorist attack 2015, and somehow everyone was really concerned about terrorism financing, obviously. And why there is no company saying, okay, here we take very seriously the fact that we implement anti-money laundering and terrorism financing rule. There is absolutely I've never seen it. I don't know if you have already seen it, but a company which takes somehow a little pride, or at least trying to make it as a marketing argument, it doesn't happen. Why is that? Why?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because we see it in other fields, right? So we can see people making, I don't know, if you think about clothing, for example, where they talk about, we don't use child labor, we use natural products, all that kind of stuff. And so you can see it happening there. But it's interesting. This is, I guess, because it goes back to your point that it's very technical. And so the question is would it make commercial sense to talk about that? Because if you were to promote that, what the message you would probably be sending to your clients is, we're going to be really bureaucratic. We're going to be complicated.
Yeah.
This is going to be harder for you, right? So if I had a bank, for example, that marketed the fact that it was very hot on, I don't know, let's just even say compliance, right? We're really tough. We believe in being very, right? Anybody going for business is going to think, this is going to be a nightmare. So I guess part of the reason is that it might theoretically be a good thing and it might look like a positive, but actually practically, would your clients like it? And I think maybe this is the scale of the problem, right? Is that this feels like a painful process. And so if we look at other situations where we have to comply with rules that make life more painful for us, we can sort of understand them, right? We sort of understand why there are speed limits. We sort of understand why airport security, we understand why that exists. We might not like it. It makes life more painful, but we get it. With this, it's kind of like, well, actually, this is just painful for me. I don't see the benefit. And I do think one of the things that's interesting about your observatory thinking, that the language and the way you talk about it, is that in many respects, nobody's really making the case for it. We make the theoretical case, but we don't really explain to people how this, you made the link, the terror attack that all horrifies us all, and the realities and the fact that AML is in part to prevent that sort of thing from happening. It cuts funding off from these people, but that link isn't made. And so I like this idea of shining a light on it. And we need to give people a greater understanding. And maybe there's a public education piece. Maybe there's I don't know, but I think it's, we're not going to see. What's interesting is I think we're not going to succeed if we just keep doing what we're doing.
I agree. And it's there. Like it's a little. It feels a little bit hypocrite.
Hypocritical. Yeah.
Hypocritical. Yeah. Because it's there. So it's like, why do you trying to hide the fact that we have rules and somehow maybe in smaller businesses, real estate and everything, some of them are putting in place documents just to educate their client, to say like, I'm not having fun doing that. I'm not having fun getting your information, but I am obliged to do it. And I would say somehow they are really on the face-to-face with clients, maybe with bank. It's no longer the cases, and it's like, do you want your loan? Yes, no. Give me your documents. So I guess also the type of relationship with the client would impact on the way you disclose the fact that you need to comply with the AML regulation.
So how do you solve this problem? You talked a little bit about in the work that you do. So you obviously, where you can create a checklist, that's okay, helpful, right? Because that one, it means that that they're doing it. It's sort of from a legal perspective, it provides some sort of cover. It means that processes are happening. But what do you do for the stuff that you can't put in a checklist?
I go on this type of situation. It just takes longer time, so I just do check again, like every week, every month, and then just like, okay, give me one file. What did you do? Okay, this is good, but you have to now go there, look at back again your internal procedure. It takes more time, and you need a lot of counseling, like almost walking by them on their side on a very practical level.
So this is almost like coaching.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This is AML coaching all day long. Yeah.
And is it, when we think about the psychological challenges, obviously what you're asking them to do is to think slightly differently. And so, I mean, I could see situations where in many respects, what they need to do is really unhelpful from the client relationship perspective. You could probably say I'm not sure there's always a direct correlation, but the bigger the property or the artwork or the asset that you're talking about, that potentially has greater risks because authorities are more likely to look at it. And so this is really quite challenging, and getting people to think about that while they're focused on the commercial deal is quite difficult. So how do you work on that psychological thing of getting it uppermost in their minds? Because you can't force people to think about something.
So first, I would say yes, for sure. It's changing the relationship to the customer. No wonder about it. However, most of them, or maybe I'm just too optimistic, but most of them, actually, the big changing will be in the formalization of it. And if they are, I think I just attract the good face people, the good face professional. That I have no one who came to me and said, okay, I don't want to do it, but just try to help me just let's help me pretend I'm doing it right.
Yeah.
No, so far I didn't attract those people. So somehow the biggest challenge was, okay, when you have your internal red flags, when your gut says no, you have to actually formalize it. And when your gut says yes, you also need to formalize it. So the biggest challenge is, okay, you're going to keep doing everything the same, but you will have more formalizing work. So it's like, okay. And and I try to also be very practical and also a little bit positive, like to make them maybe understand that they could get more information about their clients, which means more information, more way of better handling the customer relationship, or even better selling more, maybe having more idea of maybe this piece of work, piece of art will also fit this customer. So I try to change a little bit their mind about it. But somehow I'm also, I'm not going to pretend that this is a weight, very light weight. It is heavy, but also if they don't do it, even if they are not like implementing instinctive vigilance, if they don't have it, they will be fine, and or even preventing of doing business. So that is a very, very strong incentive. I also trying to be very practical. I send them the message that I understand their commercial objective, and I'm not here to implement AML with effect for them to destroy their business. Like, no way,
Right.
no way. No, but I, I, I see often on LinkedIn compliance officer spending their time commenting, and I just say, in my head, I call them, I label them compliance little soldier. And I think it doesn't make sense. Like, you cannot just go boom, hey, you cannot be just working only with big boxes. Life is not about boxes. Life, especially when you are on the operational level, you know that you're always in the gray area. So you can leave your boxes and leave your moral, not value, but your moral sense of it. For me, AML regulation is law. It's about implementing law, legal regulations. So we need to apply our legal mind, because this is what we have developed in the law school. We need to apply it to AML. So I try to, and being a counselor, like outside counselor, a lawyer, is also somehow ensuring that you are compliant with the law, but also that it fits your business. So, because if it doesn't fit the business, and if you close down, well, we have failed, and we are not going to be able to follow the money. So, I am very practical, and I am not afraid. I am not afraid of making executive decision, like executive counsel, executive advice. I am not afraid about the fine, because I am a professional, and I can say, okay, in case of control and maybe proceeding, we will. This is what we will argue. So yeah, this is how I'm dealing with everything.
I love that pragmatic thinking, because I think you're right. It's super interesting when you get, and sometimes regulators do this, where there's no understanding of the realities of what people are going through. And if you come along and you say, here's a list, you just have to do this, and you don't try and understand the problems that they have, the difficulties that they have, they're not going to listen to you. I'm reminded of teachers at school, where if you are taught a subject, right, you can teach them, you can just teach the theory, or you can make it interesting and relevant. And which one do kids listen to and learn from? The answer is the ones that make it relevant and interesting and try and engage them. And I know what you mean about LinkedIn, where you see things and you're just like, no one's going to buy your services, right? The only people that will buy your boring services is either where they're hiring you so they can say they've hired you and they don't really care, right? It doesn't have the effect. Right? Or they're just not going to buy you in the first place, because they're going to go, this person is painful. They have no understanding of what we're doing. And so I think it's almost like a little bit like a diet program or something where you can impose, theoretically, you should eat healthy food all the time. But if you don't recognize that people are human and that they're sometimes under pressure, you have to find ways to deliver it to them that fits in with their normal existence. And so I like this idea of you being, thinking that through and saying, actually, what we have to do is we have to make this work for you. And of course, you can't change the law, right? You can't sort of go, let's pretend that law doesn't exist. But there are ways, I think, of saying, how do we make this law realistic? And of course, there are some laws that really, really, really matter. And there's other things where actually we can be a bit more pragmatic and sensible. They're not all the same thing. And so I think having this kind of eye on the commercial makes it, as you say, right, one, nobody's going to hire you, but two, how do you solve problems sustainably? Well, the answer is you think about the realities of the people's existence and then you design with that in mind. And so that leads, I think, to much more, it requires a creative mindset, but it's much more likely, as you say, to one, be sustainable for your business, but also it'll sit much better within theirs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's I think we have the same approach to the rule, and it's about being intelligent, maybe. I don't know. At least uh, effective. I mean, we have to keep efficiency. Like this old stuff will get to nowhere if you just apply without any more focus. Like, can we talk about efficiency? Like the whole AMA regulation, the AMA regulation within enterprises. Can we agree on some criteria about efficiency? I think that would be a good step to maybe challenge a little bit the little soldier of compliance mindset. Because when I see compliance officers sharing every criminal decision about money laundering, I'm thinking, okay, what do you want me to do with it? Like, are you a prosecutor? Are you a police officer? What do you want to become a civil servant and become a prosecutor? So somehow, and I would say it's normal that lines are blurred sometimes because the private sector is asked to collaborate to the public sector and into getting knowledge, financial information for sure. But at some point, I would be advocate for a very clear separation between what a private sector can do and should be focusing on compared to the investigative police, prosecutor, and justice. So two different stuff. And especially, I worked in a bank a long time ago as compliance officer, and it was, I prefer laughing instead of crying about it. I was already a lawyer, but I decided to see to go there to see how they were protecting stuff. And the chief the chief compliance, he was like making up, being a little bit confused into the criminal offense, which was underlying a case. I'm like, no, this is not it. This is a different. And then I realized that there were absolutely no book into the service, and especially no criminal code. And I was like, how do you expect to make intelligent suspicious activity report if you have no knowledge about it? So I can understand that it is it is important, and it's leading to that. However, I think a compliance officer should not think himself as a policeman, as a prosecutor, because it is not. We are only talking about vigilance. We are not in the street trying to catch a bad guy or in the bank. And somehow the blurred line, I'm not fond of it. And I would say even that it's a little bit, I would say, dangerous. It's too much. It's a strong word and doesn't fit, but I am not comfortable. Well, I'm not comfortable with a compliance officer thinking he's a policeman, because then in terms of managing a day-to-day compliance cases, like, okay, you ask your client documents, and you are a bank. After 2 days, you are getting super aggressive, super angry, super aggressive that didn't bring the document. But we are in the middle of August. Can we please focus about it? So even if you're going after a criminal offense, like you should, I think everyone should remind themselves that the real position they are in.
And I think that this pragmatic thinking, right, is kind of what the function is there to do. Because I think if all you're going to do is just basically say, here's what the law says, right, and we must do this, and you don't start to think about the reality, you don't translate it, then what you're basically saying to people is, well, you might as well just get them to read the law. Right? Is you're not really fulfilling any function. I think the role is really, which is what you're talking about in what you do, is you translate. Right. So you have to understand what the law says, and you translate that into something that makes sense for people who have other things to do. And I think this is a really good example of something that I talk about, which is to say the average employee is not interested in compliance. I don't mean that they want to break the rules. I mean that they are not passionate about reading rules and understanding the detail. Because if they were, they'd be working in compliance. Right? They're interested in sales or marketing or whatever their job is, production, whatever that. And so I think we have to sort of meet people where they are and serve that translation purpose. And if you're just saying, for example, do this because this person went to jail, and so you just need to, right? You're not helping them to do that because it feels dramatic and like you're doing your job properly, but you're not. Your job is to actually help those people and to work with them to pragmatically solve it. And so I guess the reason your business exists and you're as successful as you are is that you are filling a gap. And that gap is between what does the law say and then what are the practical realities on the ground. And in the way you were describing the little compliance soldiers, that's missing a point. Filling the role that way means you're not closing that gap. You're maintaining the gap between the real world that people operate in and what the law says. The job is to bridge that gap and to work out how do we turn the everyday behaviors, back. That's why I thought your example of the gut instinct was interesting, is what you're basically saying to people, you already have the basic tools to understand AI, right? And that basic tool is if it feels suspicious, you need to do something with that, right? And even if it feels okay, do something with that. So in other words, we're relying on a skill they already have. We're just helping them to do that. And we don't do that by not making the connection for them with that skill. If we just say, here's some rules you also need to think about, that's not helpful. Bridging the gap between how you might feel about it and the law, that's the trick here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the only value that we have is this one, bridging the gap.
You said so jokingly, people who want to break the law don't come to me, and it's a funny observation, but it's good because there are certain law firms out there that I'm sure would be happy to fulfill that function, and we know that's why lawyers get into trouble from time to time because they're not doing things the right way. But there is something interesting here, which is if somebody has got in touch with you, they are trying to do the right thing logically. And so what we've got to do is we've got to kind of recognize that, because the real criminals, they're not bothering to get the sort of advice you're giving. They'll be getting advice on, how do we cover this stuff up and that's not the kind of legal advice we want to encourage, but it does go on. So people are coming to you already there. And what I think is interesting is you've identified that what you have to do to solve the problem. And so in a way, your business only exists as a commercial operation because you've already bridged that gap in your business model. You've thought about this, and that's what you're marketing to people, is to say, this is difficult and I'm going to help you through this world. And so you're working with people that want to do the right thing, but just need help to do that. So the fact that again, that challenge exists means that we see the law is not user-friendly, right? The law isn't written for that purpose. And so we have to kind of create that. So I guess are you writing the user manual for the law? Is that the way to look at it?
Yeah. It's clearly I'm doing extensive interview with the client just to understand how things work, and then I try to I'm thinking, hey, what about if we do that like that like that? And no, it's no because and I just take everything. So yeah, it's user manual, absolutely.
When I think about the sectors, you mentioned real estate, you mentioned art. Presumably that there are other sectors in a similar thing. Is the challenge here that people? I mean, presumably some people haven't even thought about these laws, and suddenly for some reason they become aware. And I think that comes back to your point about this isn't publicly understood. We don't teach people about it, and so they're not aware of the issue. I mean, presumably you've got some people saying, "Oh, I didn't even realize, or I wasn't aware, or I've just suddenly discovered this. Help." I presume that happens quite a lot.
Yeah, when they got controlled. When they got investigated for AML, for the quality of the AML implementation. So most of the time they are still discovering it, or they thought they did it good, and it happened that they didn't. I have a client. It's the first time that I see a real estate engine that I put in place by himself a lot of things, the risk mapping, the internal proceeding, a long time ago, and it got controlled, and actually it wasn't sufficient for the administration. So it was the first time. So it's so complicated, and this client had every intellectual power to process it, and it was good faith, and actually it still wasn't enough because it's super complex, because it's complex, and because the material from the administration is not good enough to help the real estate agent understand and being really clear about what is asked for them. And so here we are. He thought it was okay, but actually, some there were clearly some room for improvement.
And that it's interesting actually when you talk about regulation in that way, because I do think there's something about regulators putting stuff out there that sort of is, here you go, we've written the rules, just do it.
Yeah.
And you have to work it out for yourself. And I think I sometimes wonder whether, and I'm not trying to do you out of a business, but I sometimes wonder whether actually this is the problem with it, is that we've got something that's highly technical that sets things out, and there's no requirement on regulators to make this stuff easy. In fact, the only regulators I can think of are ones that deal with consumers, where we recognize that traffic is a really good example, right? That we try and distill down traffic into, that's why we have road signs, and to make it comprehensible to people. And we think about, we train people on what those signs mean. And so the people who create the law are recognizing they need to create an environment. Now, you still need to have a driving instructor to teach you these things. But they've built a structure that allows people to do that. And I can think of lots of other examples of where the government bridges that gap. In something like this, it's kind of like it's designed, it's back to the initial conversation. It's designed for large organizations that have the time, that understand this technically. They haven't really thought about what this is like. And so when you've got a situation of somebody trying to do the right thing but still failing, then I would argue in some respects that's down to the regulator up to a certain extent, because well, what did you expect? What did you think they were going to do? And actually, if they have to come for advice all of the time, is that effective regulation? And I would argue probably not, right? It's not a simple process to follow. And so I look at it and say, it's not really, in many respects, what you're highlighting is it's not really surprising given the way this is set up. And back to, we're helping the criminals, because we're really not making it as easy for people to do themselves as possible, which gives you a business opportunity. I get that's helpful. And I suspect that this problem is not going to get any easier, because we're not going to have less rules. We're going to have more. So more business for you, good news. But I think from a societal perspective, that seems to me to be the wrong answer, is they're not thinking this stuff through as much as they could. And maybe we need to be thinking about, and that's why we don't have the education programs. That's why maybe we need to societally be thinking a bit more in those terms and saying, actually, this should all be built into the regulations and the legislation, as opposed to requiring people to work it out for themselves.
I know, and what you're highlighting, it's what has getting compliance started is like the state, the administration, acknowledging the fact that they are not staff or resourced enough to actually going to go after criminals, drug-related people, and they need help. They need help from and so the fact that they don't have enough resources or not being staff enough or not being trained in a very technical way, like the banking or whatever insurance and everything. So they turn themselves to the private sector and say, okay, by the way, you're going to help us because we are not whatever, just what I've said. So basically, I think this is the essence of compliance. Is it's somehow the states saying, yeah, we are failing there, and we need your help. And so it's a bit of a transfer of usual state area of competence, and a little bit of transfer to the private sector. And so today the administration not guiding in a good way enough the small businesses, because as you say, big company, they will have a full service of lawyers and legal counselor. It's not a problem. But today we have expanded so much that it covers a lot of very small businesses who don't have legal training and maybe don't have the resources to hire a lawyer. But they don't really care, I guess, because it all started with a failure from the state. So it's a transfer of burden of work. And so if the state need to work to make it super easy and everything, so maybe they don't have time to work on the cases. So we are just circling back to the problem of resources, staff and everything. But this is the essence of compliance. It all started with a state failure.
One of the key things that strikes me that there is a lack of trust. Right. So one of the reasons the authorities behave in the way that they do is that they don't trust people to do things. And I understand why, if you look at the kind of criminal elements, of course, you can understand why that trust isn't there. But if I take some of the sort of people I could imagine would come to you, these are people that want to do the right thing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be talking to you, because there's no point in spending money with you if I just want to tick a box and I don't care, because you're gonna provide a different service, right? You're gonna think, but this lack of trust doesn't really help, because it just sort of becomes a game that you have to play. And so what we're doing is people will come to you, I guess, either because they've either seen somebody else who's got into trouble, or they've got trouble themselves, or they genuinely want to solve the problem and they know that they're not doing so. But having that driven through fear isn't necessarily helpful. It's gonna end up with a world of people wanting checklists as opposed to supporting people. And I guess there's a balancing act to be struck, right? So for every moment you work with people that want to do the right thing, you maybe provide loopholes for people that don't. But it just seems to me that the more I hear you talking, the more I just think the balance is wrong. And I've worked in banking. I understand the broad, what AML is about. Do I have any understanding of the detail of what you need to do in a sector? Well, I just about understand it in banking, but do I understand what that would mean for real estate? Probably not, because I've never thought about it. And so if I find that challenging, then somebody that's never thought about it is going to find it super challenging. And if we surround that in a climate of fear, and so you will go to jail if you don't do these things, I can see why that's appealing, and I can see why that's effective. And so, but that's quite a challenge. And so we've got, I don't know, it almost strikes me that we've got the wrong incentive structure around this, and that we, for every person that's come to you, there's probably hundreds of thousands of people that haven't, that aren't thinking in these terms. And that are just kind of, because we're asking a lot. They have to climb a big hill, and it feels like a lot. And so you're not incentivizing people to try. You might as well just run the risk.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see what other incentives so far the administration has thought about it. And I don't have another, like, in the way things are now, I don't have another solution. Like, so this is my solution about everything, like making everyone and every citizen knows about it, because it will just help the understanding of the regulation and will help, of course, to deliver the right philosophy about the AML regulation, not about ticking the box.
So I guess, so then all of this points to one of the reasons the observatory is there, right? Is you're trying to create a greater awareness, you're trying to make it a bit more user-friendly, you're trying to have open discussions, and so that people can learn from other sectors in a way that makes this whole challenge easier.
Absolutely. And also what we do at the observatory is pretty simple. It's like getting people together and like, okay, what are your challenges? And then one say, okay, my challenges is that. And then suddenly you have three people saying, oh, I am not in the same area than you, but I have this, I share it. And like, okay, let's be together. Like, let's be more intelligent together to try to think about it. And also what we do, what I've seen very, very effective is like we do some lunches with the administration, so the financial administration, or we do lunch also with the national FIU, and it changes everything to have someone say, okay, to have the administration saying, I don't want to destroy your business. I want you to help me face to face, eye to eye. And it's changing really the apprehension about it and the switch. And also it's reassuring because it doesn't say, you are criminal that I want to stop. No, you are a lie. But this simple message, I think it's not convey enough. And especially if it's the only incentive, as you mentioned, is the fine or the deprivation of work capacity. And this is what we do, and it's super effective. All it takes is one lunch, and things changes, and like just bring people together, make them to talk together. And of course, everyone has to be good faith, because if it's only about I'm not happy, yeah, okay, we are not going super far. But somehow this area, this stuff is super important. And our FIO is organizing for the first time in 30 years a massive forum in a fortnight. And I think it's good. Like, it's a good way. So they are bringing everyone, every sector. Maybe they have stole my idea. they are bringing everyone for one morning just to talk about everything. And it's going to be the first time. And that kind of event and initiative, I think they are super important. And it will be, it going in a good way.
So there's two things I love about that, right? The first one is funny because it's like the French solution to problems is to have lunch. And I think, which I love, right? I love that. Massive fan of that, because it'll be really good lunch as well. So I'm a huge fan of using lunch to solve problems. I love that. But I think the second one is just this dialogue and just trying to understand. And if we look at, it's almost that failure to have the dialogue, the failure on the part of people writing rules to understand what people who might need to comply with them are. But equally, the people who are having to comply with them is giving them a forum in which they can ask those. You can ask dumb questions, right, and just bring things forward. I think is super powerful. And of course, why wouldn't you do that over lunch? So I love that. So I think, Solène, that is the perfect point at which to finish things. But before I let you go, if people want to find out more about you and about the observatory, how can they do that?
So they can go on the website www.olab. 6amlo.com. And to me, they can go on my website, clementavocat.com, and they will have everything there, or on LinkedIn, the Anti-Money Laundering Observatory, and I am Solène Clément.
Perfect. I will put links to all of those things in the show notes so people can easily find it. But Solène, as I knew it would be when we first met, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for being a great guest on the show. And thank you for all the things that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Christian. And thank you for your very wise and smart question. And it was a great talking to you.
Thank you.
So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Solène for appearing, and to you for listening. To find out more about Solène, the Anti-Money Laundering Observatory, and the work that she does, have a look in the show notes. There are links to all of those there. If this is your first time listening to the show, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms.
To discover episodes that you might have missed in the past, have a look at the show's website, which is humanriskpodcast.com. I'll be back very soon with another episode of this show, but in the meantime, stay safe. Remember that regulation can be handled more pragmatically. And thank you so much for listening.